So at what point do you present the gaps in the study?
Well,
and is it always necessary that you spell out the gaps in your paper?
Yes, of course. Even narrative reviews should have a gap.
Is it necessary to use a standardized process for reviewing the papers, or you just have this head knowledge that, okay, I'm to look at the methods, the findings, and the conclusion?
The issue is that in narrative reviews, there's no standardized method. Okay. I know that you can do quality appraisal when you're doing systematic reviews, when you're doing meta-analysis, when you're doing meta-synthesis and all that. But in narrative review, you don't need a structured process.
Welcome to Giba TV. We are happy to have you in another edition of our program today. My name is Hansen Pepu. I remain your host. And with me in the studio today is our wonderful guest, Gideon Nwabueze. You're welcome, sir.
Thank you for having me, Mr. Hansen. Hello, viewers.
So today's edition, we are going to be talking about a very important aspect of research, which is literature review. So we are going to be looking at the different components of literature review, how to approach them, how to understand them, and how to put them down in writing. So let's start with the basics, sir. Can you tell us what a literature review is?
Okay, literature review could be explained to be the identification and synthesis of relevant literatures in order to provide a comprehensive understanding about a particular subject.
Okay, so what you're saying is before you go deeper into your research, you need to have a broader understanding of the issues surrounding the topic, or should I say the title you are working with. Is that right?
Yes, of course.
Okay, so why do we always need to do that? Or is that necessary every single time? Is there an instance where we may skip a literature review?
Well, literature review is very important because, in fact, it is one of the foundational strategies to identify in a research gap. So it helps you to know the extent to which there has been a scholarly discourse on that subject you want to investigate. It helps you to identify controversies. It helps you to identify gaps and how you can be able to fill gaps not existing in literature, or that it's limited in literature.
So are you saying that you do a literature review before you come up with a research topic?
Definitely. Before you, previously I was able to tell us the difference between research topic and research title. Before you can actually coin your research title, you have to do a literature review so that you can know the extent to which studies have been carried out on the subject of your investigation. Then afterwards, you'll be able to identify loopholes or gaps existing within literature.
Okay, lovely. So now, I would like you to also explain in terms of writing the review report. So what are the things you will consider, all right, in putting down a literature review? What are the things you need to consider? I'm talking about the components that should be in a literature review.
Okay, well, the components of a literature review actually depends on the type of literature review you want to do. For example, if you want to do...
Sorry. Before you go deeper, I think based on the word type,
okay,
I think before we go into the details of the components, we should know if there are types of literature review. So can you talk about the types of literature review? Yes,
there are many types of literature review. As a matter of fact, I will not be able to mention them all. There are a lot of them. We have the narrative literature review, which is also called the traditional review. We have the systematic review. And of course, under systematic review, though systematic review can stand on its own, but scholars have been able to say that we also have meta-analysis and meta-synthesis. There are differences between meta-analysis and meta-synthesis. Then we also have rapid review. We have quotient review, we have historical review, we have argumentative review, we have umbrella review. We have different kinds of review, and some of these reviews have been used interchangeably by scholars.
Okay, so what informs a researcher's decision of the type of review to do? Is it based on the discipline or based on the topic or any other factor?
Well, the type of literature review to adopt depends on the purpose of the review.
Okay.
It depends on the purpose of the review. But I also know that over the years in clinical studies, systematic literature review has been used to analyze evidence based on a defined research question.
Beautiful. So let's pick a case study of a narrative review. Okay? So if I want to conduct a narrative review and I have my topic, let's say the effect of oil spillage on the farming system of Ogoni land, effect of oil spillage on the farming system of Ogoni land. Now this is the topic or the title that I have. Now I want to do a review. Where do I start from, and what do I put together to have my review?
Okay, well, to start your traditional or narrative review, you have to consider the concept, the basic concepts or elements or variables in your topic. For example, you said the effect of oil spillage in farming systems in Ogoniland, right? Now, so in that title, I could see oil spillage as a concept. I could see farming as a concept. I could also see farming systems as a concept, and I can also see that there's a geographical scope of the title. I can see Ogoniland there. Okay. So now basically I will write down the elements of my title, then arrange them in a logical format so that I can proceed from one concept to another. Like I identify the patterns of my title, arrange them logically, then I'll take them one after the other so as to provide a comprehensive understanding for each of the concepts.
All right, so I think that's clear enough, but because you have different variables coming together to form this topic, how can you decide on the right way to interpret your results? So, for example, there's something called theoretical framework.
Okay.
Do you think that theoretical framework should be applied to every topic? And in the case of the example, how would you capture the framework that would be appropriate to the study? Is the framework going to focus on which of the components or the variables of the topic will have the underpinning for the framework?
Okay, well, the theoretical framework to adopt, there are different theories, models, or frameworks that have been proposed by some scholars. So the theoretical framework to adopt may not really have how will I put it? It must have a link to your title, but it may not be able to bear the name of your title. For example, if I want to check the effect of creatine supplementation on athletes, like creatine is an amino acid which have been found in foods like fish and meat. If I want to check I can check theories like performance enhancement model. because this theory supports the fact that there are certain substances that people use to enhance their performances. So it depends on your title, and it depends if that theory can suitably anchor what you are studying.
Okay, are there instances where you may have to skip theoretical framework in a study?
Definitely there are.
Okay.
Definitely there are. It's not compulsory you must do a theoretical framework.
Okay.
Like,
So,
for example, when you're doing a primary study, it's essential you anchor. In fact, some people make a lot of mistakes. The fact remains that if you want to adopt a particular theoretical framework, though the theoretical framework must be reflected in the research specific objectives, so that you'll be able to test the constructs of the theory. But most dissertations or theses I see, you see that the theoretical frameworks are more or less like they provide theoretical support to the research, not providing evidence which will be investigated, like a subject rather that will be investigated in the research.
okay, now,
So you see, their theoretical frameworks sometimes are just like standalone from it. Like there's this gap between the research objectives and the theoretical frameworks.
okay, so if I understand you, if you have used a framework in your literature review, that framework should have bearings with your objectives.
Definitely.
And that means in your discussion of the findings, the framework needs to come back again. Like there has to be a reference to the framework again. Is that what you mean?
Yes, of course.
Okay, beautiful. So we've talked about conceptualizing the topic
Yes.
and theorizing the topic.
Yes. Operationalizing.
Operationalizing the variables. So what else would make a literature review
So
narrative?
So now, when you have operationalized the variables of your title, now the content matters a lot.
Okay.
There has to be a critical analysis of literature, not just I know in narrative reviews, you don't use a specific method.
Okay.
Some other types of reviews could have structures, rigid structures you adopt. But narrative review, you just use a narrative approach as if you are telling a story. But even at that, as you are telling a story, there has to be comparison between studies. Like you have to show evidences in study, you have to compare findings of studies to make up your narrative synthesis.
Okay. Which means you're talking about being critical in your writing.
Exactly.
So if someone who is new to empirical research or review, now what is the critical element? What should the person look out for in the papers that this person is reviewing?
Okay. All right. Now, the most important aspect you should look at the methodology and the research findings. Because I could have two scholars researching on a particular subject, but they are using different approaches. But you see that there could be commonalities in the findings of the authors.
Okay.
So you look out for the findings, then you also look out for the methodology, and as well you can check the conclusion. After study, what do the authors recommend? What are they concluding based on the findings of the study?
Now, is there or are there frameworks, or if I may say templates, that can be used to standardize a narrative review? For example, there are some reviews where you need to use what we call CASP. All right, CASP. Now, for narrative reviews, is it necessary to use a standardized process for reviewing the papers, or you just have this head knowledge that, okay, I am to look at the methods, the findings, and the conclusion?
The issue is that in narrative reviews, there's no standardized method.
Okay.
I know that you can do quality appraisal when you're doing systematic reviews, when you're doing meta-analysis, when you're doing meta-synthesis and all that. But in narrative review, you don't need a structured process.
Okay.
You don't need a structured process. Other literature reviews like scoping review, rapid review, systematic reviews can adopt a structured process. That is where you have to identify, appraise the identified articles and be able to synthesize the findings of the articles. But for narrative reviews, no. There is no standardized process. The most important thing is for you to articulate and operationalize your variables in the most appealing manner and critical format.
Okay, now, from my experience, I've noticed that some of my supervisors in the past have asked me to present my literature review as if I am already answering my objectives,
Okay.
but based on other people's work.
Okay.
Do you think this concept is acceptable, or what is your take on this?
Well, the concept is acceptable because that's basically in Nigeria, that's what we call empirical literature review. There you'll be looking at related studies that have been conducted on your subject of investigation. Then you present the study, the methodology, the findings, and all that. Well, I feel that it's a form of literature review itself because we have empirical review. We even have conceptual review. So there's a lot of confusion when it comes to literature review.
Okay.
So, but what we are discussing basically is the narrative literature review, which is the traditional. It's a conventional. In fact, this one does not need any structured approach.
Okay. So, at what point do you present the gaps in the study?
Well,
and is it always necessary that you spell out the gaps in your paper?
Yes, of course. Even narrative reviews should have a gap you want to fill.
Okay.
Any type of, in fact, let me make it clear that literature review is a secondary research. It's a form of secondary research. So, previously I defined research as a systematic and theoretical or empirical investigation. So when you are doing a literature review, you are doing a theoretical investigation into a particular subject. So there has to be a gap you want to fill.
Okay.
You don't just write because you want to just write something.
Okay.
There has to be something your paper wants to, cover.
Okay, so for the sake of emphasis, because I know that in our previous edition we talked about gaps, but I think the discussion around gaps is more appropriate when we are discussing a literature review. Definitely. So for that reason, I'd like you to talk again about what to look at from when you're looking for gaps in studies. Okay. And again, do you look at gaps in individual studies or in the studies as a whole?
You look at gaps from a perspective.
Okay.
You compare studies. You look at, let's assume you've been able to identify 20 studies relating to your subject of investigation. You look at the methodologies these authors adopted. You look at their findings. Did they use the same approach? Are their findings conflicting? Are they similar? Even at that, what is the geographical scope of the existing study? Were all these studies carried out outside Nigeria or within Nigeria, or is there any research gap in a particular state? Is there any place this research is supposed to be carried out that is missing out in literature? So you look at methodology, and because some authors may even tell you the limitations of their studies, they may tell you that this study only adopted a survey process and more rigorous methodologies are needed to conduct for further investigation. So if you are to now use mixed method and any form of approach. So there could be a methodological gap, there could be a geographical gap, there could be population gap, there could be just different kinds of gap that you can identify.
Okay. All right. So now, I've once argued with a research colleague about where your research question and hypothesis should occur. Now, traditionally, we were taught that once you have your aims, objectives, the next thing will be research question and hypothesis if it is a quantitative study. But then recently, I came across a school of thought that says your research question should follow the gaps immediately, and gaps occur in your literature review. So I would like to get your opinion on this. Do you think that research question should occur together with the objectives, or should it occur after you've identified the gaps in your literature review?
After you have identified the gaps in your literature review, the next thing that should come up is the research question, because that is what the author is pondering. The truth is this: some scholars will tell you that you don't even need to put aim again, because the research question actually captures the aim of the research. Some scholars will tell you that you just need only one research question. But here in Africa, we have many research questions. Of course, it's acceptable. There could be a case where you have different questions you are asking based on the gaps you have identified. There could be cases where you can have a central research question that will now result or culminate into specific questions or research objectives.
Now, from what I said earlier too, I have found out that most people coin the research questions from their objectives instead of based on their gaps.
Okay.
So I would like a clarification. Where do you think we should derive research questions from? Should it be from, because most of the time when you look at research objectives and questions, it's as if someone is turning the research objectives, changing it into question format. So I want to find out from you, is that a good practice, or can a research question be something independent, something based on gaps?
If we understand what research title is, then we need to know that research title is actually the gap.
Okay.
It's what you want to is specific. So your research question should definitely reflect your gap.
Okay.
And the title must be coined in such a way that when somebody looks at it, the person should be able to just have a picture of what the author wants to do, the gap, what the author wants to investigate.
Okay, so that's why it must always tally with your objectives.
Yes, it has to tally with the objectives.
Okay.
It has to, because the objectives are the targets of the study.
Okay.
Those are the statements that will guide the study.
Okay.
So it should also have a takeoff from the research question, and everything should point to the title, because the title itself is the gap.
Okay. So one last question. I hope you don't mind.
No problem.
Now, the question is about the structuring of the empirical component of your review. Most academics believe that you should come from the top to the bottom. So, is it always necessary that if I'm carrying a study about Ogoniland, I must look at what was done at the global, at the sub-Saharan, at the Nigerian, as in national, at the state level before I come down? Is it always relevant to do that?
Well, it may not really be relevant in some cases. Last time we discussed, I told you that there is no fast and hard rule whether a researcher should adopt a top-bottom approach or a bottom-top approach. It depends on your title, the title you are looking at, and the best logical approach to follow. But when you start from the global scale, then downwards to the context, the local context you want to, that shows high level of criticality of the subject of your investigation. So it's also advisable that when you look at issues that are of global concern, you should start from the global perspective before you tilt it down to the local context.
Okay, so there should be a reason behind how you present the work.
There should be
if it's a topic that has a global context, then you can review from the global,
exactly,
like issue on climate change.
Exactly.
Okay, very good. So thank you so much, Mr. Gideon.
Thank you, Mr. Harris.
It's been a very wonderful outing, and I'm sure that our audience have learned and benefited from today's program. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Welcome.